gardens at the farm. Now, some of you may have seen some pictures and some stories and things like this, but this is my first official live to show off my gardens and to show you guys what I'm doing in November in a brand new garden plot. First though, figured I'd pull this little icicle radish out because it is radish season. There is no doubt about that. And look at this little puppy right here. Aren't they pretty? And radishes are really delicious in that you can actually roast and eat them, you can pickle them, and you can also eat them fresh in a salad, and you can also eat their greens as well. And so we've done a little bit of both already with some of the ones that have been coming out of the garden. And then when we start to get the massive quantities, and I'll show you here in a little while the big massive root bed that I have planted out here on the farm, but by then we'll start pickling them. So the news is that in about a year, Joe and I will be moving out to Taft, Texas. For those of you that don't know where that is, it's about, what, 18 miles from where we live right now? So just a little bit outside of town in a rural suburb area of Corpus Christi, Texas, for those of you that don't live in Corpus Christi area. And this is kind of where I started the whole mission of Grow Local South Texas and the downtown farmers market and all of that stuff. It all started here about 10 years ago. And I started trying to figure out how to grow food for my family. And we, as a family, looked into this piece of property and decided that we wanted to start trying to create our own freedom from the natural system, freedom from the industrial system, freedom from a very specific type of healthcare system, all of those different types of things. And what I learned in those early years was that it was going to require a little bit more pre-work before I could get back out to the farm. So I can tell you that after spending all of that time planting seeds, growing the local food system, I am very, very, very excited to be back planting seeds on the farm and growing right here in this little amazing area. Now, this is just one of the gardens, and I started planting it about the last week in September. So this bed right here is about 5 or 6 weeks old, and mostly what's planted in it is tomatoes and different types of beans. It's got some lima beans in it, it's got some long runner beans. Now, for those of you that don't know what a long runner bean is, they sometimes will call it a foot long bean. It's this really long bean that is really most tasty for different types of Chinese stir-fry type of things like that, stir-fry type of dishes. And they're really, really good tight runners. So once they catch on, they'll run up. And I'll show you over on another fence line where they seem to be doing a little bit better than they've done over here in terms of catching. And then in addition to that, so one of the things you need to know about as it relates to beans, and this is a thing that I've learned that a lot of folks actually haven't yet learned about, and that is you have pole beans and then you have bush beans. And pole beans mean they need a trellis to pull up. Bush beans means they'll grow kind of bushy along the ground. So the ones that I planted along the edge down here on this side are what would generally be considered a type of bush bean. And then the ones that I planted over here that are starting to now grab a hold of and climb up are one of the types of pole beans. Now, a lima bean is a pole bean, and those yard-long beans that I mentioned are also pole beans as well. So some of the other things that I've done, so in these rows where I have the tomatoes and the beans planted, I also planted a lot of peppers, and I also planted some radishes and other types of companioning plants. So you might have heard me mention borage. There's a lot of borage in here. This has a really pretty edible flower. The leaves are really tasty for your animals. They have kind of a prickle to them, so they're not something that we traditionally eat, but the flowers are really pretty and they're edible. They kind of have a cucumber flavor to them, I've heard from quite a few people. And then in addition to that, I also put in marigolds and different types of flowering things. I actually have even one sunflower, although I didn't do a ton of sunflower planting, but I do have one nice big sunflower. And then zinnias, and then you can even see down here where I put in a purslane as well too. And part of it is when I go in and put one plant in, the reason that I'm doing that is because I want that plant to start to seed out, and then it'll help me for the future, because the future of this garden is going to be a lot more perma structure than what is traditional for kind of a row garden, right? So yes, I will shift this out, because as we work our way this way and you begin to see what other types of things I've planted, where you see the trellising is not up, this is what would be considered my Brassica Rose. So this is where I've got the broccoli, the cauliflower, the cabbage, all of those types of things. And the Brussels sprouts, that's what you've got pretty much going on all in these areas right here. And they can grow with the beans. There's no problem for them to be with the beans. However, it's a little late. Once I finally got to this section to plant them, it's a little late for beans, because what happens with beans that can really affect them is those cold winds. And out here in Taft, away from the urban area, it can be even crisper and harder and colder winds out here. So I have to be a little bit more aware of the idea that beans might not do as well in planting in later seasons. So I'm not really planting any more beans at all. And so when it was time to put in these Brassica Rose, you can see that primarily what has gone in here is brassicas, kale, spinach, lettuce, different types of flowers as well. I like to use alyssum. That's a really pretty sweet alyssum. That's a really good one. I also like to use nasturtium. Now, I mentioned nasturtium this morning. This is what I'm talking about here, these pretty little leaves. They're going to put on some really pretty flowers. There's also some of these pretty pansies as well. Now, I did plant by seed nasturtium and some pansies. Most of what I planted directly in terms of my nasturtium, I just planted those directly in the soil, so you'll see a lot more of that coming up as these rows start to really germinate well. But a lot of the pansies, I actually bought those from a nursery, because that's one thing I'm learning a lot about this year is new seeding different types of herbs, seeding different types of flowers that I've never seeded before. So I'm learning about the timing for those. So things like thyme that I did buy from a local nursery, chamomile that I did buy from a local nursery, but I'm also still trying to get those to be in a situation where I can seed them myself as well. But again, just like with the purslane, if I can get some of these to really take off in here, then they'll reseed themselves, because I like to leave my plants to do their own types of seeding. So this okra, one of the things that had started this garden, which ultimately made us decide this was a great place to kind of stick with it, because one of the things is once you start tearing up dirt, and especially when you're talking about 10 acres of land, you got to start somewhere, and you got to put in the time and effort, especially if you're going to grow the way that I grow in more of that permaculture biodiverse style where you're not doing a ton of tilling. So once you get that established, you don't want to move away from that and keep tilling and tilling and tilling it up. And so that's what you found. This area was actually an okra bed, just one okra bed this past summer. And then after that, we did go ahead and re-till it again so that I could get it in a little bit more of a different formation. And then we put on top of it in the summertime while I was preparing my beds, a heavy, heavy layer of sand, and then a heavy, heavy layer of composted manure. Now, it's not just manure, it's all different types of compost, but manure is the hot microbe. I mentioned that to you guys before, that you gotta have the hot microbe in there in order to get the compost to really break down quickly. So this is a compost manure. I actually got it from San Antonio from New Earth. We had them deliver a trailer load of it down here for us. And we put a big portion of it on this bed, and we put a big portion of it on 2 other beds that we're using as well. We have a really, really hard pan of clay out here. So, I mean, truthfully, once I hit the ground here, as I was rowing these up on my own, it's hard as a rock, okay? So, after a time, when we put in our irrigation systems and we put the mulch in the footpaths, just like we do at the backyard garden beds, eventually this bed will have some really, really good topsoil, not only from the organic matter that I've put on it, but because of the way we've treated this soil over time and the amount of moisture and organic matter that has grown out here. This will be a really thriving, strong, long-term commitment garden out here. And even if we move things around like the trellises, we will leave our irrigation in place, but we don't have to do a ton of that massive turnover. We've pretty much done it. I did it this season for the most part. Now, if you come over here, you'll see this is kind of the last section. And all of this is pretty much stuff that I kind of let grow out over this bed, or we'll pretty much just let grow out over this bed. A lot of it actually was Bermuda grass. So as I was tilling things up, I really cleaned as much of the Bermuda grass as I could out of the rows as I built the rows up. Hopefully I'll catch those pieces as I'm going through weeding and get more of it out and more of it out and kind of keep it manageable as much as I possibly can. But I'm going to go ahead and turn up this last section right here, and I'll pull back all of this organic material. I actually won't leave this in because, number one, all of these little bitter melons will seed. And number two, I don't want that Bermuda grass in there. So I'm going to go ahead and pull all that stuff off the top of it, but there's a nice layer of the compostable manure, like I mentioned before, and the sand, enough to build up one last row, that I'll have one last row for the brassicas. And I mentioned this morning the brassicas again, the broccoli, the cauliflower, the kale, all of that different type of stuff. Now, one of the things when I was talking earlier about the section that I have that's the tomatoes and the beans, and then I put the radishes there, but I don't put radishes over in my other brassica beds because radishes and brassicas don't like each other. I don't really know why. I haven't looked into that enough, but I've been planting radishes with my tomatoes and planting more of the different types of kale, spinach, lettuce, and things like that to grow around it. Now, you can see how, come back over here. These rows really begin to get nice and covered. There's a lot of coverage going on here. And the more coverage I can put in purposely on my own, the less weeds are going to grow up in types of things. And so one of the things that is helpful in working with an experienced gardener or a coach, or looking at gardens that gardeners have grown, like in a video like this, is getting a better understanding of what to weed and what not to weed. So you're looking down here and you're beginning to look around at things, and you've got all these plants and all these little baby starts coming up, and then you have to decide, okay, let's see, what's that? Okay, I'm gonna pull that one out. That's a nut grass, right? But I've got another little baby of some kind right here that's likely a different type of radish. So I'm kind of keeping an eye. Now look, this is a marigold or a Cosmo. It's probably a Cosmo, I think. So there's a little thing that you don't want to pull up, but sometimes you can get tricked and you'll see something that you think is a Cosmo and it ends up being some sort of a weed. And the trick with that is that if you let something grow out and you don't know for sure, the moment you see the flower and you recognize what it is, pop that baby out as quick as you can. Try really hard not to let the weeds you don't want seed. That's the most important part. Now, when it comes to Bermuda grass, the answer to Bermuda grass is to have animals that eat it and tear it up. That's really the only long-term answer to Bermuda grass. But the good news about that is that Bermuda grass is full of good protein for your animals. So if you get a situation where the Bermuda grass is just really overgrown and you need some help, instead of just going in and retilling it again, instead create a situation. For us, we'll do a tractor, a chicken tractor, and we'll put our chickens on that one row and let them tear it up and clean it up for me. And then if I have to row it back up again and put some stuff in it, it will at least have had animals that have gone through and dug out all the weeds and really gotten control of it, gotten all of the pests and different things like that. So you can still have a permaculture style garden that is a little bit more traditional in the way that you row it, and that it helps you out with some of that harvestability, just making the harvesting a little bit easier. As opposed to, you wouldn't want to do the edible landscape the way I've done edible landscape on 10 acres, because eventually you're going to run into a situation, unless you're simply leaving it and you're letting the animals eat from it and things like that, you're never going to be able to harvest that quick enough and efficiently enough to make it worth being a marketable type of garden. So edible landscape is not foodscaping. Edible landscape, those things are not perfect for production growing. However, this can be a really good style for production growing.
So,
yes.
So you put in okra here before, and now you've refigured it, formatted it into this row structure.
And put a lot of material on top of it. It didn't have all this material when we first had that okra bed out here.
What are the top 5-6 foods planted out here right now?
Tomatoes, squash. I want to show you. I've got some really pretty. And then I mentioned this the runner beans. That's that yard long, and they do a really good job of twisting up the pole. And they grow those super long, fun beans. So tomatoes, beans, squash. Here's a couple of little yellow squash. That one will be putting on some more here pretty soon. And then, oh, I'm so excited. Hopefully, as long as I don't have any issues with freezing, I've got spaghetti squash. I've got a few of those actually that are doing quite well over here. And then of course my zinnias, all these pretty zinnia flowers. That's I forget what it's called. It's like the Benares big white flower, something like that. Quite a few of those. Here's another thing, and I'll show you that some more of those winter squash in a minute. This is buckwheat, and I actually planted this particular variety of buckwheat back when we were first preparing these beds in the summertime as a cover crop. So after we tilled it, we got the okra out, we tilled it up, then we put down the layer of sand. I'm watching Maggie move around the garden. She's taking the footpaths like a good dog. Look at her. So we put the sand down, we put the composted manure down, and then I did a bunch of cover cropping seeds out here. And the cover cropping seed I used was this buckwheat, which is a really good for attracting those different types of beneficial insects, but it's also a very deep miner. So it will go down deep in the soil deep, and try to push its way down and help to break up some of that clay pan, that hard clay pan, and draw up some of those minerals that are deep in the soil to bring them up to the top of the surface so that the plants have better access to it. And so that's one of the types of cover crops that I used as well. And so is this. This is also that's the oil seed radish, right? Okay, so those are all different types of things I'm growing out here. I'm also growing those brassicas, as I mentioned, the broccoli, the cauliflower, the cabbage, kale, and then I just recently planted spinach and lettuce. So actually on this row over here, you can see that I do have some lettuce coming up. All right here. And lettuce is a really good cover. Also carrots. Carrots can be really good cover for tomatoes as well, because carrots grow really slow and tomatoes will grow big and full, right? And so once you get the tomato taken off and off the ground, then the carrots can come up later, and they will, because it takes them longer to germinate, and then they'll cover the soil. So just like lettuce can cover the soil really nicely and keep the weeds out, so can the carrots. Now I didn't plant any carrots over here in this bed because I have a very specific row that I planted that's just my root vegetables that I'm working to try to grow. So you can see I've done a lot of companioning. Another thing that I learned that is a really good companion, in addition to radishes for your different tomatoes and your green beans and things like that, is collard greens. Collard greens are actually a very good companion for tomatoes. And so a lot of times they'll tell you not to put your nightshades. Your nightshades are your eggplants, your tomatoes, your potatoes with your brassicas, but there are a few different types of brassicas, or things that are traditionally seen as brassicas, that actually don't match well with nightshades. And that is our radishes, that do match well with the nightshade. That is our radishes and our collard greens, like I mentioned before. And so, okay, I'm trying to think of what else. One of the things that I'm doing a lot of work on right now is really trimming these tomatoes up so that I can get them to grow up the trellising. Now, I'm not a huge run right out and cover things for freeze type of situation, especially when we're not living out here. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we will have a long, warm winter, and if we freeze, it won't be enough to completely knock back my tomato plants. Now, if we get a freeze, even if it's a small one, it will freeze the beans and it will freeze the squash. And that's just what it is. It might freeze the tomatoes. I would definitely run out and grab all of my little green tomatoes off of the tomato plants. But coverage kind of depends on where I am and what I'm doing and how much time I have to take care of something. Now, at the house, I'm more likely to protect things from freeze. So the plants, the things that I can move, the pots, things like that, those are the things that I would take care of. one of the things I can do, and we have already begun talking about, is making sure that we get the irrigation system in place here in the next couple of weeks. That way I can put down that heavy mulch all around this whole area. All of these, just if you look down here, you can see it's just kind of a mud hole at this point. This will be a heavy layer of mulch down here. And then of course making sure it's irrigated well. So with the mulch and the irrigation, that will keep this microclimate, you've heard me talk about that a few times, that will help to keep this microclimate a lot warmer here than it would have if it had not had any type of mulch or the moisture from the soil. The other part about picking this location has to do with the wind protection that it has from the barn, and then also from the house that's right next door. So that, just look for those places to get your microclimate started when you're talking about massive places with lots and lots of land coverage that you need to handle. Look for the places that are small and intimate and start there first. Start growing lots of warmth in that space and use the protection that you have. Plant trees that can help with some of that shade, shade, yes, but also can help with some of that wind barrier and wind block. Fence lines, things like that. So you look for your little like niche places when you're in a big farm scale situation like this. So let's walk over. Do you have other questions about this particular area, Joe, or thoughts?
What's the main difference between, not the capacity, because that just makes sense, but the types and of different foods that you can grow between the backyard garden that everyone's familiar with and this new, row style?
I think that it mostly has to do with quantity, really. The ability, like I can grow, 3 or 4 nice sized cabbages, 3 or 4 nice sized broccoli, 3 or 4 nice sized cauliflower, maybe 1 or 2 winter squash. I'm just limited in the things, but I'm still trying to make my backyard a landscape. So I'm also filling in the gap with a lot of those larger perennial plants that I've talked about, like the Turk's cap and some of those other perennials, the plumerias and things like that. Whereas out here, I'm not doing a ton of that in the garden. Now, there may be a situation before too long where we've got this all managed really well around here, and we've got it all portioned off to where then I start to go in and create more of that kind of edible landscape feel over here, depending on how we can manage moving the machines through here. Because if we've got to mow and we can't get back here, it's too hard. It just kind of all has to do with like the timing and things that you have as it relates to that. But one thing I was talking about earlier that I kind of got distracted from, and that is about leaving things to seed. And I talked about the purslane, I talked about the chamomile that I've planted. Some of the plants I leave out here because the same way I do at the backyard garden is I leave things to seed, and the best way to have some beautiful seeds from this particular okra plant is to let these pods pop on their own, and so that's the reason why I've left them out here. But in addition to that, you can see that I actually have a nice little okra plant coming up over here. Now they don't like the winter too much, but they will still put on some okras as long as we're managing that space pretty well. So we're gonna pass over now to another one of the gardens that we've started since I've been working on this. And as we pass through, what we're going through right here is my dad's grape vineyard and orchard. And he's been putting in a lot more grapes. He used this Spanish Lenoir. It's a black grape. And he does make wine with it as well. And then in addition to that, he's also going to be putting in a bunch more up there as we keep moving things forward and creating more of that. He's also going to do more blackberry growing as well, because blackberries are a good blending match for those grapes. And then we've also got some good pear trees, and we're learning what are the best trees for us to grow in this hard clay pan soil out here. Now a lot of these orchard trees have actually been out here for a long time, but that's the thing about getting new land, is that you have a lot to learn about the land as you're learning. You might also be learning yourself, like myself. Even if you're a seasoned grower that's been growing a long time, when you get a new piece of land, you have to learn it. You have to learn what its soil is going to do. You have to learn what its pests are, what its weeds are. And there is a complete difference in terms of pests when you're talking about being out in the middle of cotton fields everywhere. If you look across the street over there, those are cotton fields. And during cotton season, they were overspraying the the stuff that they use to kill the green on the plant so that they can then harvest the cotton. And so of course they're doing a flyby and all of that kind of stuff. And that, you know, can potentially cause frustration for people that are trying to do organic gardening. But more than anything, what it does is it drives their pests onto your land, because their pests are looking for something green to eat. So that's one of the things you have to keep in mind about growing. So this is a bed out here that's a root bed. And what you have is, and it's actually, you can see it pretty good. So over here on the ends, right here where the grass was kind of, where the mulch was kind of thin, you can see that I've got my carrots that are starting to come up right in here. And so all down this center section outside of one little place where I can walk down is, my carrots are starting to come. Nah, get out there. Go on. Come here, come here. Ay, ay, ay. Stinky dog. Okay, so all of that, down there in the center of it is my carrots that are starting to come up. Carrots take longer to germinate. In addition to that, we planted the carrots, and the length of time that it takes them to germinate was during that time we were having the really cold overnights. And so it's taking my carrots a little bit longer to germinate, but I do see them germinating, and I also see a lot of weeds germinating too. So this is some things that I'm learning about how to manage this land out here. And one of the things that's going to be really helpful when we're out here is that I can look at it on a daily basis rather than an everyday basis and things like that. But those are things you have to keep in mind when you're growing or leasing land for production, is that how often are you going to be able to tend those? When I'm talking about my backyard garden, I mean, I'm truly tending that garden every single day. I'm looking at my babies every single day and seeing how they're managing every single thing that's happening in that particular yard. So I love you, Maggie. You're such a good girl. So what I have planted over here is some of the longer, so these are short day radishes, or short early season radishes. It take, you know, 28 to 32 days. Whereas a lot of these radishes that I planted out here are more like 50 to 75 days. So they're those big, fat, beautiful, like black Spanish radishes. Some of those long, I think it's called like a Jumanji or something like that. And then there's that really pretty one, they call it the watermelon radish, that I love. I absolutely think it's one of the most beautiful things on a plate that you can put on a plate. I've got a bunch of those growing out here as well. And then of course carrots, and then a flat space, and then I've got a bunch of cylindra beets that are coming up as well. That's what's coming up in this section right here that you start to see little red all the way down. The other thing that's planted along here kind of on the inside, so you got radish, some more radishes on the outside, but a little bit on the inside as you go in down there are turnips. So that's something we love to use, turnips, when we make like mashed potatoes. They're very, very delicious roasting root vegetables, just like a potato is basically. So, and here's the thing, when I was talking about looking for and beginning to know, I know for sure that that's a weed. So I'm gonna start pulling those out as I move along this particular bed here. So that's that. All right, one last thing I have, I'll show you. Let's go, let's see, we're gonna go this way. You can see my radishes, my turnip, they're real close to the edge over here. This is a weed I like to make sure I get pulled out. This is a nightshade weed. And one thing is that it's bad for the animals. So we try to make sure we keep that one weeded out really well. You can see it coming up all along here. But as long as I catch it early, that's what I'm looking for, is trying to catch things early. What they look like down inside there. Is anybody poking out yet? No, I don't see anything yet. Ooh, look at that. See all that red stuff coming up right there? That's beets. It's all beets. And I'm gonna have to thin this stuff. It's just way too close. But as I mentioned this morning, I would prefer to overplant than to underplant. And I may learn over the years how to be more comfortable with planting just the right amount. But for now, I'm learning, and that's the way I'm doing it. Okay, so this is another bed. We actually did plant black-eyed peas in it this summer. And it has gotten the same treatment that the bed that we talked about at the beginning. So has that root bed as well. So we put in the sand, and then we put in this composted manure, basically. So this is just a lot of good nitrogen. This stuff is, in my opinion, out on a broad scale, on a bulk scale, this is really the only closest answer we have, is San Antonio New Earth. I like to get this one pulled out, this weed, because they're a pain in the butt once they start growing flowers and seeds. Okay, so my plan for planting is to get your compost manure from New Earth in San Antonio. You can drive up there with a flatbed and get a few yards to bring back to you, or you can have an entire truckload brought down to you, which is what we did. And we may have another one done next year. So one a year for a couple of years in a row till we get some beds built the way we want them, and even our trees in a way that we want to get them really happy and healthy. When you're dealing with the kind of clay that we're dealing with here, yeah, you can imagine that it's going to take a lot of work to get the soil really where we want it to be. Now, this particular area out here has been grown in quite a bit. This is where I grew my very first garden when I first really started to move into production and farming and small scale farming and stuff like that. So this area has had quite a bit of work and organic matter. But there's other parts of the farm that we still have to do a lot more work on as it relates to that kind of stuff. And that's okay. You know, we're learning, we're bringing this land back to life. It feels really good to be regenerating land that, you know, hasn't been in cotton production in a long time, but that's what it was cotton production out here. No doubt about that. So my goal for this is some more brassicas and possibly some potatoes. We've been talking about bringing in, my dad actually got another dump load of sand. And so what we may do is do one whole half section of this on just potatoes and then leave the other section. I've also got quite a bit of onions that'll be coming in next week. So those are some ideas of some things that I'll be planting. I've got quite a few broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage and baby starts, as you saw this morning on this morning's video, that I will have to plant. But there is the ability, and I've mentioned to you all of this before, the idea of succession planting. And that basically means that as I pull something out, I put something new back in its place. And I do that as long as that plant has the potential to be well and healthy based on what the weather that we're dealing with actually is. So as I pull out these radishes, I can go back in and plant some things right back in those spaces. Or I can let the plant that's right next to it grow big and happy while I'm pulling these out. That's a really important part as you're working through your root beds in your different roots, is that you do harvest things. Now, especially with carrots, you can harvest them in different sizes, and then you can look around that carrot and see is it really compacted, or does it have plenty of space? And if it's really compacted and it has a lot of little plants around it, then go ahead and pull out the biggest one gently so that the other ones have the opportunity to grow around it. And that's some of the succession type of stuff too. So giving space for other things to keep growing. And as you get towards the end of the season for our rooting and bulbing vegetables like onions and carrots and turnips and all of that kind of stuff, you'll get bigger and bigger and bigger product. You'll get bigger beets, you'll get bigger carrots, you'll get bigger onions, all of that type of stuff. But in the early season is when you get the young ones, the early ones, the new potatoes, the new carrots, the baby carrots, all of that stuff. So that's kind of where some of that stuff comes from. So that's really it for today. I hope that was a lot of fun. We did a lot today with this morning and then this afternoon coming out here, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I know that we will do this again very soon because I have a lot going on, and I'll want to show you this bed and what I've decided to do with it once we finally get that going. I also have 2 large hugelkultur beds, and I'll be planting in those next after I get these all planted. But then once we get in, I don't think I mentioned, did I mention at the beginning of the video, Joe, that we're moving out here? Mm-hmm. So we're moving out here, and our house is in construction right now, the house that we'll be living in, the farmhouse. And once that is really established, then I will start turning that area into a backyard garden like what you guys know us having in town. Now, it won't be an urban backyard garden, but it will be a backyard garden all the same, and it will have backyard chickens in it. And yes, we'll do all types of other livestock out here. Of course, someday I'll give you guys a tour of all the current pet livestock we have, the longhorns and the potbelly pigs. My mom and dad like to call them the pasture ornaments. But we'll show you around and do a farm tour in the future. But that's really all I have for today. I hope that you guys had a fantastic Sunday and you're spending a lot of time outside in the garden and enjoying the sanctuaries of nature that are all around you. Have a great day. Love you guys.